I want to welcome you to our second part of our conversation about race and social injustice in America. We are so grateful to have this amazing panel with us again for the second time. If you missed our first conversation, we just touched the tip of the iceberg dealing with the issues around race, social justice, and policing in our area. We were blessed. We were grateful to have everything from some young dynamic leaders on the forefront of the social justice movement in our area, to the mayors of our three towns, Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and East Palo Alto. We also had the chief of police who of both East Palo Alto, and we really were grateful to have the sage and wise wisdom of Pastor Paul Baines. Tonight, we're going to dive deeper into this conversation, and again, I am grateful that I have with me as my co-moderator, Professor Allyson Hobbs from Stanford.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I'm so excited about our conversation tonight. It was a real honor to be a part of part one, and I'm really excited to hear how our conversation unfolds in part two. My name is Allyson Hobbs, and I'm a professor of history and the director of African and African American Studies at Stanford. And it's a tremendous honor to join Reverend Smith and all of our esteemed guests. And I am so grateful for Midpen Media Center and Jesse Norfleet and Stan Ing for organizing this event and creating this really important space for the continuation of such an important conversation about racial and social justice. So why don't we start by having our panelists introduce themselves?
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Albert Pardini, Chief of Police for the City of East Palo Alto, and looking forward to a hearty dialogue tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Smith and Professor Hobbs, for hosting us in Midpen again. I'm Adrian Fine, the Mayor of Palo Alto, lifelong resident here, and it's really my privilege to lead the city this year, dealing with COVID crisis, the economic recession. Hopefully those are temporary, and some of the most durable change that I hope to affect this year is addressing systemic racism in my city and what we can do that here locally.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Nyla Shote, and I'm a 17-year-old incoming senior at Milpitas High School. I am here to talk about systematic racism within the education system, because that's right now that's what I'm fighting for within my own high school and through my nonprofit, My Roots Are Rich. I led the Black Lives Matter protest in Milpitas, and I'm just super looking forward to this conversation.
Hello, my name is Pastor Paul Baines. I am the pastor of St. Samuel Church located in East Palo Alto, and also the founder of Project We Hope, which provides homeless services and we run a shelter in East Palo Alto, and also we're in 4 counties and 17 cities in the Bay Area. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Hello, my name is Illyasha Peete, and I work with the Center for Excellence in Nonprofits. And we are really empowering leaders to help facilitate change and to help leaders of all kinds appreciate diversity and inclusion in education and in leadership. It's a pleasure to be here. And my parents were really a part of the movement, and I'm from the South, and I believe in diversity and inclusion.
Hello, my name is Ayinde Luko-Toon. I am an incoming freshman at Pomona College, and I was one of the co-organizers of June 6th Palo Alto protest against police brutality and systematic racism, memorializing the death of George Floyd and all the others who were victims of racially motivated police brutality. And I'm just really honored and humbled to be included in this panel, and I'm really excited to work with everyone else to see how we can make our area a more safe and equitable place for everyone.
Good evening. I am Regina Wallace-Jones. I am the mayor of the city of East Palo Alto, and super excited to be joining this panel and especially my own chief, Chief Pardini. I have participated in many of the protests that have happened over the last several weeks, including Allende's protest, which was extraordinary. And I feel like I am among friends, so able to have a really healthy and honest conversation, continuing a dialogue that we started a few weeks ago. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chief Bob Johnson for the City of Palo Alto, and I also am excited to be here this evening, and thank you for asking me to come back. I look forward to not only listening and learning, but to continually be engaged in the conversations we've been having over the past several weeks. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Cecilia Taylor. I'm the mayor of Menlo Park. I'm very grateful to share this platform with everyone. Another opportunity for me to listen through a lens of quality of love and quality of service. Thank you.
As you can see, we have a very distinguished group of panelists. The real goal of this forum is to have public interaction. So there's a couple of ways that the public can guide this conversation and be included in this conversation. There's a simple feature at the bottom of your chat that will allow you to raise your hand. Once you raise your hand, we'll be able to bring you in to ask a question. You can ask one question or make one comment at a time and pose it to the panel. I would really love for you to start by raising your hands in the chat or asking questions in the Q&A. I will be monitoring it as my co-moderator, Professor Hobbs, starts us off with questions. So please start raising your hands if you have questions at this time.
Great. Thank you so much, Pastor Smith. Yes, we're very excited and very eager to get as many voices into this conversation as possible. So we really do encourage you to raise your hand and ask a question. So I wanted to start just with a few words in tribute to civil rights leader C.T. Vivian and Congressman John Lewis, who died within hours of each other on Friday, July 17th. C.T. Vivian was a disciplined advocate of nonviolence, a lieutenant to Reverend Martin Luther King, and he served on the front lines of the civil rights movement. And as many of you know, Congressman John Lewis represented Georgia's 5th congressional district starting in 1987. He grew up in a sharecropping family near Troy, Alabama, where Jim Crow ruled his early years. He was not even able to read books at the Pike County Public Library, which was for whites only. When he was barely 20, John Lewis was among the first Freedom Riders. He soon became the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and helped to organize the 1963 March on Washington, where he spoke alongside Martin Luther King. The elders in the movement judged his original text to be too radical and too confrontational with the Kennedy administration, and made him tone it down. In March of 1965, John Lewis led the march from Selma to Montgomery, and on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, a state trooper hit John Lewis, fracturing his skull. Lewis refused to go to the hospital. Instead, in a daze, his pale raincoat splattered with blood, he made his way to the pulpit of Brown Chapel, where many of the protesters, choking from tear gas, had assembled. Lewis told them, quote, "I don't know how President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam. I don't see how he can send troops to the Congo. I don't see how he can send troops to Africa, and he can't send troops to Selma, Alabama." Later, more recently, John Lewis was quite outspoken against the current administration. And he said, quote, "I have been in some kind of fight for freedom, equality, basic rights for nearly my entire life. I have never faced a fight quite like the one I have now." And he he said that he would continue to do what he had always done, which was fighting for the beloved community. And I want to start with John Lewis because I think that a lot of people felt a particular sadness and a particular heartbreak when he passed away, particularly seeing the image of his casket going over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I think a lot of people have seen him as being sort of the conscience of the civil rights movement and the conscience of the nation today. And so one question that I've heard many times is people asking, John Lewis is gone, what are we going to do now? Who is going to be the outspoken leader? Who is going to challenge this current administration with the kind of moral clarity and moral leadership and the historical involvement that he's had? So I'd really love to start with the young people on this call, with Nyla and Allende. I'd really love to hear you talk a little bit about your thoughts or your reflections on John Lewis and the legacy that he leaves, and how you might answer that question about, now that John Lewis is gone and now that other major civil rights leaders are passing away, what you see as the next step in this ongoing freedom struggle.
Yeah, most definitely I can answer that. I would say, first of all, just speaking on John Lewis, he is just someone that I've always looked up to with the civil rights movement. He has just persisted. Like he literally, in anything that he does, he has just always had the Black community as a backbone, fighting in politics. And he is someone that I just look up to so much and who I strive to be. And, you know, hopefully one day I could live up to becoming someone like him. I just think that he is a person that I want to know it's going to be going down in the textbooks. He needs to be recognized for everything that he has done and fought for America. And I just think that going forward, with other civil rights leaders passing away right now, it's just, you know, the next generation stepping up. I think it's us really looking at what their legacy is and how we can continue that. For myself, it's just first spreading his message, spreading what he did, and how we can continue that going forward. So yeah, that's definitely what I think. And I think it's very possible. I think right now we are seeing a lot of young people step up, and we're seeing a lot of young people like really take lead in the Black Lives Matter movement, and even striving out, like with myself, like just going to like what we specifically want to fight for, like such as the education system. So I think it's going to be really amazing to see what leaders we see form.
First of all, thank you, Professor Hobbs, for such an amazing discussion about, you know, his legacy. But I think his story and the story of so many other civil rights leaders is personal sacrifice for the rights and the equality of others. Talking about racism is not easy. You know, forging those bonds and burning some bridges with people, you know, for the sake of the dignity of others is not something that is easy. And I think the best thing we can do to honor the legacy of the civil rights leaders that endured the worst types of trauma and harassment and violence because they cared about the dignity and the civil rights of others is to look at our own lives and say, you know what, we have a baseline level of security and safety. Let's have those uncomfortable conversations. Let's do the things that aren't easy so that other people don't have to live with indignity. And I think that's the best way we can perpetuate the legacy of Senator Lewis.
Thank you so much. That was so eloquently and powerfully put. Thank you both.
Now we have a question from Fatima in our panelists. So we'll have Tech get them on the screen to ask their question.
Thank you so much. I'm Sudha Fatima. Thank you. It was such an honor to be part of this tribute to Mr. Vivian and Mr. Lewis. We have organized into a group called Redwood City Community for Racial Equity and Fair Policing. Black Lives Matter mural was removed in the stealth of the night by the council because one white woman wanted to paint MAGA 2020. This was in the news. I don't know if all of you saw that. So we're trying to get that mural, a BLM mural restored. We presented an idea like Cahoots, which is an alternate policing system. The police entanglement in the school districts. I work in Redwood City School District, and I've witnessed my students being brutalized by police on campus, minor students who are special education students, quite recently. And my question is about one of the projects we're working on is Next Door. And the racist narrative that's taking place across the country. So I've collected a lot of these narratives, and I know in Atlanta they've started a petition for Next Door, and I'm hearing stories from Oakland about how people calling out racism are being blocked. So we're composing a letter and a list of demands for Next Door leadership on what they can do about racism, the racist narratives in neighborhoods. So this is slightly different from Facebook because a narrative is in our neighborhoods. These are our neighbors, and in elite white neighborhoods like ours, or where I live, I should say. My question is for this panel, one of our demands is that the Next Door should have a panel of BIPOC people or African-American activists to moderate the conversation, because the conversation on Next Door is moderated by leads. So in elite white neighborhoods like mine, the leads are white. And so I feel like the way they're moderating it is to block us for calling out racism. So, but I don't know, as our group, we don't know what our demand should be for the panel. Who should compose the panel? Do you think? What should I demand me on this? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Could we start by just having perhaps Mayor Fine, would you mind talking a little bit about the Black Lives Matter, like the controversy around the mural, just to make sure that everyone is aware of what's been happening? Could we?
Different cities though. Redwood has a different controversy from Palo Alto.
Okay. And I just want to make sure, so the question is about Redwood City specifically.
Oh, the mural, we can put the mural story aside, of Redwood City mural story aside if you want, and you can talk about Palo Alto mural. My question specifically is about the panel moderation that we should request Next Door to have.
Okay.
I'm so sorry, but I just feel very strongly about the controversy surrounding that mural. Do you mind if I speak briefly?
Go ahead. Have a feeling.
I think what was painted on the street was a fact, or what should be a fact for any person that respects the dignity and humanity of others. Black lives do matter. I saw a great analogy, because the unfortunate reality is that we have to analogize Black lives to inanimate objects for people to see their value logically. And it said, when you say the statement, a carrot is a vegetable, no one disputes that. No one says, oh, well, what about broccoli? Broccoli is still a vegetable. When you're discussing objective facts, I don't see how that can be a partisan issue. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. It isn't a partisan issue. And to that end, I don't think it's inappropriate for a city to paint that on a public road. Black lives do matter. Now, painting the slogan of a presidential candidate is inherently partisan. It's inherently partisan. And I think when you examine the phrase itself, make America great again for whom? When in the past was America great for minorities? When was it great for women? When was it great for people who were not empowered? And I think that that sends a message that should not resonate with any of our cities that we want to regress, that we want to go to a time with less advancement. And I think the notion that if we cannot say Black Lives Matter without painting partisan statements on our streets as well, I think it's absurd.
Thank you so much, Ian. I want to I think you bring up a great point, and we're actually going to talk a little bit more about Black Lives Matters being painted on the street in a few minutes. But I think everybody's familiar with what Nextdoor is, right? It is probably one of the most toxic places on the internet because people attack each other on a constant basis. But it is an informational place for neighborhoods. So I think Fatima brings up a significant point. What should be the questions they ask? I'm going to put some people on the spot. Mayor Fine, you're up.
Thank you, Pastor, and thank you, Fatima, for the question. So I spent 5 years working at Nextdoor, building product marketing, helping build partnerships with police departments and cities, and working on ways to improve that social network for neighborhoods. So Nextdoor is a private neighborhood network. Anybody who lives in that area is able to sign up. And the pastor is right. There is a lot of discussions on there which are toxic, racist, useless. There's also good information on there, like I want to sell my bicycle, I want to find a tennis teacher. So there's usefulness there too. To answer your question about what you may want to demand or ask of Nextdoor's leadership, I think maybe think about like what Nextdoor means to different communities, and different communities see conversations in different ways, right? In the Mid-Peninsula, we have a fairly liberal, progressive community, and people are willing to discuss things like Black Lives Matter. That may not be true in other parts of the country. And so if you're looking at some kind of panel of community experts, like, yes, it should have, people of color and different inputs and perspectives, but it should also probably be localized, right, to that community, so it engenders some trust and feeling. I think that's a really important part of a panel. Otherwise, there probably need to be some, hard lines there, right? Like behavior that is absolutely unacceptable. And that is a really hard thing to use a term to police online, right? Whether it's Twitter, Reddit, Nextdoor, Facebook. There's a lot of bad speech out there, and there's a lot of misinformation, and that's a tough problem. But I agree with you, it needs to be addressed because it's not helpful. And I think we need to focus on, I think Mayor Taylor mentioned something, about service and love. And, I think those are good words, right? Like how do we help each other as a community? But I'd be happy to speak offline if you just send me an email and we can chat, Fatima.
I'd like to go to Lady A, who will be our next question, followed by Dr. Valerie Riggs. And I'd like to mix it up. Can we, we got 3 mayors and 2 police chiefs and somebody from the social justice or social good space, and Pastor Baines. So let's use these resources while we have them. Lady A, are you up?
I'm here. Video's off. I'm not camera ready. I just wanted to talk about, hopefully we're going to talk about some solutions, like some policy creation with some teeth in it. It seems like I'm always in these meetings where we're doing a lot of talking about the past, and it's great to honor some of our past leaders and stuff. But in my opinion, and a lot of people my age and younger, we feel like the whole civil rights era has failed Black people. So we'd like to know at least I would like to know, what we can do in terms of creating some policies, be they economic, be they redistribution of police funds, that will help move us forward a bit. We've had some policies in place, but they don't seem to be working. They have no teeth. So I'd like to know locally if anyone could speak on maybe the mayors, what can we do about creating policy?
I would love to respond to this one. I thank you for the question, Lady A, and you're absolutely right. From my position and my perspective, being elected for just under 2 years, one of the challenges is who's implementing the policy. If they don't think that there's a problem with it, they'll continue the same practice with that policy. The other piece is that there are a lot of historical challenges because of the policies. I'll speak specific about housing because it's the one that I think people are most familiar with, and that's redlining and blockbusting. My community, the Belhaven neighborhood, was not created out of love, and it definitely wasn't created out of service. It was created to isolate a community. So there only a certain race could buy there, or at least that's where the real estate agents took you. That was the best place that they could find for us to live. There's also the piece around education. We happen to be in one of the lowest performing school districts. So you put those two things together along with being under-resourced. That means at this moment, we don't have a medical facility there. You also look at not having enough access to quality food, the health and wellness of a community. So if our communities aren't built out of love and service, there's no way to actually fix it unless people are willing to do the hard work and put teeth into the policy, but also challenge the person that's implementing the policy to make sure they're actually doing it in a way that would bring equity, inclusion, and access to everyone. So there's a historical problem in some of our communities. I'm being specific about where I have grown up. I am the third generation in that community. And so I have a deep rooted knowledge of it. And now that I'm elected, it's my role to do something about it. So I was one of the 2 council members that proposed the moratorium because we are overdeveloping an area, but we're still under-resourcing it. It doesn't work that way. And so, but I can't do it by myself. So we all have to stay a part of this process to help move things forward. And you're right. And it's been a frustrating process for me. However, every day I try to figure out another way to do the same thing because I'm not going to stop.
Thank you so much, Cecilia.
And if I can extend that, Adrian, because I think Mayor Taylor is absolutely on point about the administration of policy, and you're absolutely right in some ways about, well, you're right in many ways, but I want to specifically focus on your point about civil rights failing Black people. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's failed Black people, but I would say that at that time, as you know, the laws were passed, many of the laws were passed federally, but they were administered at the state and local level. And I spent a lot of time delving into that recently as I listened to a 13-part podcast series called Seeing White, which was a very powerful podcast, and I recommend it to many. But effectively, in one of the podcasts series, the moderator or the coordinator, however you call it, the podcaster, was effectively saying that to get past the discord about the civil rights laws at that time, Congress was passing the laws and Senate was passing the laws at the state level with the agreement that everyone could take those laws home and administer them locally how they wished. And the byproduct of that is that a lot of very racist practices persisted because they were all being administered at the state and local level and not being watched after by those who had actually made the federal laws. So when we look at 2020, one of the best things that I love about the city of East Palo Alto is that we are living civil rights in the moment, right? When we talk about housing, we are affirming the right for the residents of East Palo Alto to be understood. We are affirming the right for housing to be built that is inclusive for, all economic spectrums, but we particularly worry about those who would otherwise be financially displaced. When we talk about jobs, right, and we implement policies like first source hiring, they're not always executed perfectly depending on the business, but we're affirming the right of the city and its citizens to have jobs that are drawn from the base of commerce that we have built in the city. These kinds of policies that we're both making and administering locally prove very helpful for communities of color because they're no longer residents in the city who are completely misunderstood by their public servants and by their political leaders. They're fully understood, and the actions that we're taking every day aren't about 1965. They're about right now, in this moment, what we can do to make sure that our residents right now are seen, heard, and profoundly felt. And my thought is that if every city took the position that the people of color in their city should be seen, heard, and profoundly felt, and considered in policy, not just sort of ignored or treated as a small percent. I mean, we happen to be a very large percent in the city of East Palo Alto, but considered in the policy making, that we go a long way in creating an alignment between our expectations as human beings and the civil rights laws that are sitting around us as people in this community.
Thank you for that. Again, I'm just a little bit frustrated because, you know, like I said, I keep coming to these meetings and like the focus seems to be on other people. There seems to be a lot of like historical context, which I get, we do have younger people here, but a lot of time is utilized talking without actually laying down some sort of plans for moving forward. So I'm just going to say my opinion, and that's just me right now anyways, that I would like for us to try to like talk more about what we can do starting now and going forward. And I'd like to humbly suggest to the lady who had questions about what to do about next door, find yourself a Black resident that will man or be the lead person for that group. If you're talking about Black lives, definitely try to encourage that. Thank you, guys.
Okay, and thank you so much, Lady A. One of the things I always say to citizens, there is a ton of opportunities to volunteer in cities. There are commissions such as human relations, planning, policing that have open slots. I know I serve as the human relations chair for the city of Palo Alto, and for years we had issues recruiting people to be involved when we were talking about, and Chief Johnson will know this from when we were talking about body cams 3 years ago and different issues. So what I do encourage people that are so that are so pointed about solutions is that each city has opportunities, and we encourage you to engage in those opportunities because they're really good to get engaged in. Right now we have a couple of questions in the Q&A block. I would like to first start with Rebecca Sanders' question. This one is to you, Chief Johnson. Since July 1st session, what steps have the Palo Alto Police taken to improve the racial and social IQ of the police force? Anything new to report?
I think, I mean, it goes to your point, your comment a few moments ago is opportunity. And I think one of the things that have occurred since June 6th is a lot of opportunity for us as a police department to listen to the community. You know, for those that are just tuning into this particular forum, this is just one of many that have been going on throughout the city of Palo Alto over the last 8 weeks. And so, you know, we have ad hoc committees, we have the HRC committee, we've been doing conversations internally, externally with the community. So a lot has changed. I mean, really, we've modified numerous policies. That's still ongoing. We're looking at ways to improve our services. We're looking at all the things that are going on, both at the regional level, but as well as the state and national level on police reform. And we've spoken to that many times in the different forums and platforms, that it is going to be a very moving year. And I think for all of us, and what I mean by that is I think this is a time, and I've said it before, for change to occur. And I think the reason I say that with some confidence, you know, even as a police chief, I can only do so much as an individual, just as each and every one of you. There's only so much we can do as individuals, and we can fight a lifetime with very little change in the needle if we're fighting by ourselves. But when we start to collaborate and work collectively, that needle can really start to change. And I think for the first time in my career, and I've been doing this 35 years, this is a time like no other time where the needle has that possibility of truly changing. And we were on a conference call, I guess about 4 weeks ago, with former East Palo Alto Chief Ron Davis, who I highly respect, who's been involved in a lot of issues over his career, who really said it very bluntly, is that for us, and I say us collectively as anybody within this platform or forum right now, many of the things we're talking about, as one of the speakers mentioned, is historical, and these systems and these structural components that we're fighting to change have been in place for our entire lives. They've been in place for decades. So again, it's going to take a tremendous effort to truly create change. But again, I am somewhat confident that I think that time is possible now, and it's more than just rhetoric. So with that, I will pass it back to you, sir.
All right, we have now Mr. Bernard Denise, or Denise, I'm sorry. We have Bernard Denise.
All right, Denise is my wife.
Yes, how you doing? I'm
All right.
sorry.
So I apologize to the young ones, but I have to put some historical perspective on it. So I am 69 years old. I am a veteran of the civil rights movement. And so I can speak to a number of things and your frustration about the fact that the civil rights movement, maybe from your perspective, may have failed. But here's the thing, who said that we need to be talking about specifics. So let me start first by talking about some specifics from the perspective of someone who was there at the time and who has lived through every one of these things: marches, having guns pointed at you, having been a victim of redlining. I lived in East Palo Alto. I had to threaten a lawsuit to get my mortgage at the time, all kinds of these indignities. So let me just say this from the historical perspective. One of the toughest things for me to listen to is to hear people say, these are tough issues. And the reason is they're always tough. The step that I think we need to make at this point, and to really keep the momentum of this movement going, is to be willing to step up and just confront the people who say, oh no, we gotta go slow. These things have been around 100 years. It's gonna take time to change. No, it doesn't. What it takes to change is to stand there and confront those who want to go slow and say, we've waited long enough, a la James Baldwin. How long do you need? Well, they've had a long time to come to grips. For all of the Karens who are running out there saying, you don't belong in this neighborhood, it's time for us to say, you know what? The person who needs to move is you. We are not going to tolerate that anymore. We need to stand up to the banks and say, you know, you're just not going to be allowed to do this. And when I say confront, I don't mean we have to get into a fight and get into ugly arguments with people. But what we need to do is spend less time saying, okay, I'm just going to listen you out. Eventually, you're going to reason. You're going to come to reason. I will tell you, 69 years, no, they will not. With generations, yeah, you'll get the younger generation that's coming along. They're much more open. They're much more open to a broader community. But I don't think, in fact, I know, because I know too many of them, many of the seniors aren't going to change their mind. Many of the 37% of the country who's adamant that we're on the right track, they are not going to change their mind. So what will make this time different from previous times is if the other 53% say, we're not going to wait anymore. We're not going to tolerate it. We're not going to accept it. We're going to make these changes. And if you don't like it, remember this. We live in a democracy and the majority rules and the majority says, we're taking this step and you're going to have to accept it this time around.
Thank you so much, Brother Bernard, for your sage wisdom. That was really, really profound. Do you have a quick question for the panelists, or was that a comment? Because I want to go from there.
That was a comment because I keep hearing people say it's a tough challenge, and we just have to confront it and move on.
I agree. I definitely agree.
That's a great segue. I think I'd love to hear Illy speak to what Mr. Bernard is raising here about pushing for change and about, I mean, I love that he brought up James Baldwin and the kind of restlessness and the kind of passion and strength and power that James Baldwin brought with his words and his actions. And so I'd love to hear your response to Bernard.
I kind of am in the same boat with him. I was a little bit concerned by Lady A's statement. You know, my parents were fighters in the movement, and they have dedicated their lives to the struggle. They were part of converting University of Memphis to a university that allowed Black people to attend. They were a part of getting people the ability to ride on the bus and not have to sit in the back. There have been changes. There have been many struggles that we've faced, but with each thing that we go through, it gets us closer, I think, to this change. And I think what's different now than ever before, my mother's 76, and the difference we both see is that it seems that we aren't alone anymore, and that we have people that are willing to fight with us, and more voices are being heard, and they're voices that don't just look like me. I'll say, for me, what we do, what I try to impart to people is that change is possible. And I give people the space to ask questions that people might be offended by asking typically. But in our work, that is what helps bring people more to the middle. And it helps to give them an education about African Americans that maybe they don't or haven't had in the past. I know there are people out there that say that they need to read a book, or people need to read a book, and they need to do this and they need to do that. But part of what I try to do is be that voice, so that if there are questions, if there are concerns, if there needs to be a way that you can relate, hopefully stories that I give can offer that. You know, about 2 weeks ago, my son, I live in Livermore, California, my son was dropping off his girlfriend. And a Karen called and reported my son and his girlfriend in the car. And it just troubles me with everything going on. You would call the cops on 2 little kids doing nothing. And I hope that people can people stop seeing my skin color as something that they're afraid of. There's a great quote, and I can't remember it right now, but it basically just says, it's hard for me to not be seen as a threat when my skin color is the threat. And so my hope is that this younger generation and the people that have come together to support the Black Lives Movement will help us create and move change in a way that we've never seen it before.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Illy. I'd love to have Pastor Baines respond to this too, because I think this is such an important issue about the challenges that activists often face when it comes to, you know, being told to move slower. It reminds me of the wonderful and famous Nina Simone song, Mississippi Goddamn. And, you know, when she's talking about, you know, how Southern segregationists are saying go slow. And, you know, so if we know that that's been a problem for all throughout American history, how do we overcome that resistance to change?
Well, as a person of faith, there is a passage that says, for ye have need of patience, that after you receive the will of God, you might receive the promise. That's Hebrews, I think 10:36. And I know how it is with young people, of working with gang members, former gang members, working in various youth departments and youth groups in both Palo Alto and East Palo Alto and Menlo Park. And young people want things done, not today, they want things done yesterday. And they have a right, because they grew up where we didn't grow up. We grew up, you know, where we would go to the movie theaters and we go to a drive-in. They grew up with drive-bys happening, at least in our community. And so they have instant access to information and they're accustomed to things moving very quickly. But I also want to address what Lady A said about the civil rights, because as a person who is almost 60 years old, and I did experience a lot of racism, and my father and the stories that they told me and things of that nature, that the civil rights movement has not failed us. We would be well beyond what we currently are in if it wasn't for the civil rights movement. Are there opportunities for improvement? Yes. Are things moving slow? I would say yes, things are moving slow, but if you want sustainable solutions, we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get out of this overnight. And there's a saying that says, you must first seek to understand to be understood. And you have to understand the complexities of the system that is in place that oppresses people. The institutional, the structural racism that is present in our society. We didn't get there overnight. And so we're going to have to chip away at this. Like they say, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. As a pastor, I have to use patience. I have to use the wisdom that God's given me, but also I chomp at the bits, because I've probably been on a good 20 of these types of calls throughout various cities in the whole Bay Area. And I have to remind myself that, okay, it's a different audience, so let's have patience in addressing and talking about these issues. But when we have the same audience, yes, we need to move from the definition phase to the planning phase to the implementation phase of action. And we do that by first starting off by educating, first creating awareness, and then educating those people who want to help us, because we can't do this. Again, what I've said before, this is not a Black problem. And we sometimes take it on as a Black problem. We didn't ask to be in this position of racism. We were forced to be in that. And so we have to work with our non-Black people and friends to come up with sustainable solutions that will address the systemic issues, particularly as they are germane to the marginalized communities of East Menlo Park and East Palo Alto, but all of America. And one of the things I just want to hit on this, I think it was Pastor Smith or someone said about redlining and blockbusting. You know, my question and my goal is to disrupt generational poverty. And how do you do that? Well, yes, you do it with education. Yes, you do it with faith, but you also do it with home ownership. We were denied forward movement by government implemented programs that prevented Black people from actually obtaining homes or homes in a quality area. And again, if you read Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law, which is what I said all over the place when Allende had their thing, I kept pushing that. it educates, it opens up our eyes on how we can start disrupting that generational poverty. We need home ownership for people of color. And then we can now generate enough wealth to help send our kids to school because we have equity from our homes that will help pay for the loans that they would discriminate against us, that they wouldn't allow us to have. So my goal is to help do that. I want to create housing.
Thank you so much, Pastor Baines. I really thought you were closer to my age than 60. You look good for your age, sir. You look good.
Great.
All right. You bring up such a valuable point. Let's talk about redlining and housing discrimination and policy discriminations. I know right now in my own city of Palo Alto, some people don't see the reason why a park only limited to certain people at a certain time is not redlining and not unethical. So I want to talk a little bit about the policies that are like systemic racism around housing and property, and using the example of Foothill Park to sort of kick the ball down the road. I'd love to hear what the panel has to say on that.
So I have an immediate reaction
Yes, ma'am.
to that as the mayor of East Palo Alto. And part of it is because there are just so many who do not realize that East Palo Alto was largely born out of redlining. We love to call it a community of color. It did not organically just grow up to be a community of color. It is a community of color because it was forced to be a community of color. And it just so happens that it has maintained much of its, DNA and reputation as that, but that did not actually happen organically. And the implications of that for me are wide. So earlier when I talked about policies that were, passed at the federal level but executed locally, mortgages and home lending is one of those things, right? I mean, where the laws around mortgages being federally backed and all of that is something that was clearly done at the federal level. But when we got to practices around how lending was done locally, that's when people got creative, and that's when racism took hold. And even 35 years after the incorporation of the city of East Palo Alto, we still see the residual effects of that, right? We see lower investments in the city of East Palo Alto. We see, substantially less focus on an investment in education. Education is clearly tied to property values. Property values were driven down intentionally. And so the schools are less well capitalized, right? There's so much residual effect associated with that for a community of color. And from my perspective, we are for sure digging our way out of that, that historical baggage that has been placed on us as people. But the thing that surprises me, and it's the same thing that surprises me about affirmative action, we can go 400 years oppressing a people, and then after 25 years of affirmative action, we start getting loud cries that we've done enough. This is something that we should no longer be doing. After 400 years, right? And the same thing is true with the residual effects of redlining. And the residual, the mass proliferating effects that has across so many dimensions of what it means to live the American dream. So I acknowledge that it is a part of our history and DNA as a city. It's a terrible part of our history and DNA as a city. And it's not just East Palo Alto that has to fix that. There were many forces at play at that time, several of whom are alive today, that need to wake up from their graves of injustice and help make East Palo Alto what it should have always been, and fully invest in the prosperous outcomes and identities of the people that are here, just like everywhere else. I feel very strongly about it, and I think it's something that we've all got to dig in and make possible together.
I think Mayor Wallace-Jones hits a number of things. And before I get to Foothills, just two quick things. One, East Palo Alto was incorporated in 1983, I believe. which is after the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission was created. And the SFPUC controls all the water in our region. And so when East Palo Alto was created, they got a very small allotment. Palo Alto was created much before that and had a large allotment. And a few years ago, we decided to donate some of our daily allotment to East Palo Alto to help them grow and build housing. That's a nice thing, but there's a bit of like parochialism in that too, which I was kind of uncomfortable with. At the same time, in Palo Alto, my city has refused to build housing, affordable housing or market rate housing, and we build lots of jobs. And we effectively externalize that housing demand to places like East Palo Alto and Mountain View, and that's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
On the issue of Foothill Park, as I mentioned earlier, I lived in Palo Alto my whole life. I had birthday parties in Foothill Park, went to memorial services and camps there, and it has always been a little weird to me that my city has this wonderful gem of nature, this beautiful park that is for residents only. And each year we turn away 2,000 or 3,000 vehicles, people who come from, whether it's East Palo Alto, Los Altos, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, we turn them away. And I can't say what the policy was born out of. People say it's because Palo Alto bought the land and no one else chipped in, so we're going to keep it for ourselves, which is, I guess, exclusionary. But the effects today are clearly inequitable, and I think it is completely just and rational for us to open that park up to our neighbors. And it can still be a wonderful preserve and pristine for Palo Altans, but like I don't see how we can keep it to ourselves. And so next Monday, we're beginning that discussion.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad that we're talking about housing because it's obviously an incredibly important issue in this area. And there was an article on Palo Alto Online in January, which talked about a housing drought in Palo Alto and about preparations to consider more drastic actions to encourage residential construction, including reviving the contentious planning community zone, which allows developers to negotiate for exemptions to regulations on height, density, and parking in exchange for providing public benefits. So I'm wondering if the panelists could talk a little bit about the housing crisis as you are talking about it, and specifically about this planning community zone, why there has been controversy over it, and if you could say a little bit about public benefits, like what that means and why that has been so inadequate.
Should I take a quick crack at this, or?
Sure.
So in my opinion, so Palo Alto had this zoning tool called Planned Community Zoning, and it was used primarily it created the majority of the affordable housing in Palo Alto. And essentially it said, if you want to build an affordable housing project, you can create different zoning rules to make that happen. And I think it was in 2013, that tool was used for 60 units of affordable senior housing. And the Palo Alto voters took that to the ballot and overturned it and killed an affordable housing project for seniors. It's known as Maybell. So in this year, we're reimagining what that tool can be because we've had one affordable housing project in the past 10 years.
Mayor Fine?
Yeah.
Not to interrupt you, but what did they build instead of Maybell?
I think it's like 18 single family homes being sold for about $5 million now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So that was the choice my community made. And I think it's a stain on the city because we should be looking at ways to promote more affordable housing and more homes for people so they can go to our great schools, enjoy this great economy, live here and prosper. I think opportunity is something to be shared. In terms of the public benefit, and I'll just say quickly, that the new way we're looking at this tool is the public benefit is affordable housing, specifically deed restricted below market rate housing. And we're looking for higher ratios of affordable housing in those developments.
Thank you so much. One of the significant impacts around housing in our area is that it disproportionately affects schools. The funding, who goes to what school, who goes where, and there's also significant racism in schools. I want to ask Sister Nyla Coates to really talk because she's doing a lot of work around that. And I want Ayende to also speak into that. And then after those two speak, we'll go to Mida Okelo and then Henrietta Barros.
All right, awesome. So specifically, I think housing does play a key role into our school systems and, you know, how much funding our schools get, who gets to go to the schools, and that's definitely what I'm working on right now. Specifically, I could talk about my community in Milpitas, and just personally growing up in schools and what I've experienced. You know, growing up, I just never got to see my history being taught. You know, we got to our English textbooks and our English books that we were required to read, and we were primarily only reading things from white authors. And it's just, I mean, every single subject, even if we get to science, you know, we're talking about white scientists. We're not talking about the Black scientists that there are in our, that are very relevant, and, you know, they just have made huge impacts. And I just think that it's just so mind-boggling to me, because I'm just figuring out so much information on my own, but it's not being taught to me at a young age, and it's not being taught to me by the school, which it should be. It should be required to learn about different people of color. And, you know, some things with my nonprofit, what we're doing is we're spreading that knowledge, and we've worked with my high school right now. And now we're implementing that. It's a requirement to take ethnic studies to graduate from our high school. And that reminds me of going back to the question of how fast the pace, and I think Mr. Baines was talking about that. And that's something that, you know, talking with my school principal, talking with the school board, it's like, you know, like we're working on it right now. And I was like, you know, how, like, when are we gonna have this? Like, I want like a date, like what year is this gonna be by? It's like, you know, it's a lot of it, it's a longer process than you know, and things like that. But it's been really great, you know, like we started petitions, we like, you know, we had parents involved, other students involved, and with that urge and with that persistence, we were able to make it a priority, especially with the things that are happening right now. So young people definitely want things to be done yesterday. I definitely agree with that. And I think it's really, you know, we get told no by so many people. And I think that, you know, sometimes get 100 no's just to get a yes. And I just stand by that so much. And even more so, something that I've been doing myself now is I have worked with, because I'm also the Black Student Union president at my school. And we started these almost classes, I guess you could say, Zoom calls that we did called Keeping the Movement Alive. And my school is primarily Asian population. And a lot of people had come to me personally and, you know, message the BSU account asking, you know, like, what do I do? Like, you know, to kind of just like keep the movement going. Like, I'm not really sure what to do. And like, could we have a FaceTime call? Could we talk about it? And I was like, you know what, let's make some type of Zoom call where we can all just have a discussion, ask all the questions you need. Basically, this literally happened last week. I had about 50 students come on the call, from freshmen to seniors. I think we even had a few people from other schools as well come on to the call. And they just asked questions such as, you know, why is there systematic racism in the education system? How is prison systems? Why is that, like, why is there school to prison pipeline? And I literally just had a conversation with them, educating them. And at the end of the whole call, they're like, oh my God, when's the next one? Oh my God, I can't wait to tell this to my parents. Oh my goodness, like, what are some more books I can read, and what else can I do? And like, oh my goodness, like, I just didn't know this. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I feel like I'm a teacher. Like, this is what I wish you guys were able to learn, you know, from the beginning. We even had a fun, an educational video that we watched called 13th on Netflix. I totally recommend it to anyone. And they're just like, oh my gosh, like, I wish I had heard about watching this documentary, because we watched so many documentaries in class about, you know, other topics, but it's just like, it's just so frustrating. It can be so frustrating, because I feel like I shouldn't have to be a teacher at, you know, 17, because I'm still learning. But, you know, if I have to take that role, I will take it, because seeing those students telling me like, oh my gosh, like, this is just so like mind-boggling. It's just so awesome. So I just say that, like, with the education system, you know, just we need to change it, and it needs to happen now. And I feel like we're gonna have that happen very soon.
So Nyla, I have one quick question before I go to Allende. How many years have you been engaged in this? Because I think there's a misrepresentation, particularly around the young people and the movement and BLM and everything else, that this is a flash in the pan, and they don't realize that people have been actively working these things for the last 2, 3, 4 years. How long have you been working on this before you came to this moment in history?
Yes, I would say since my sophomore year in high school. Since I was a sophomore, so I'd say almost 3 years now, since now I'm an incoming senior, I have been actively working with this. I've been actively talking to my principal, actively talking to the school board. So this has definitely been something that it's been constant. I think that was also great for you to bring up, Mr. Smith, is that like a lot of people are just thinking that like now, because like the Black Lives Matter movement, like everything's like coming up, like no, we've been we've been doing this. Yeah, it's just been great that this the movement has shed more light onto these issues, and yeah.
Thank you. Allende.
Well, first of all, I just could not agree with Nyla enough. But I think witnessing the images and the scenarios, you know, in tragedies like the murder of George Floyd are psychically harmful to Black students, to say the least. And I think that it's imperative that we examine, you know, in our high schools specifically, where these issues are dealt with explicitly and discussed and debated, how racism is framed and approached pedagogically. I think schools in our community really need to take stances and, you know, implement curriculum congruent with those stances on racism. I mean, I remember just this past year in my AP Gov class, we had a debate on whether or not racial integration in schools was necessary. We had a debate about it. And that was deeply harmful. And in retrospect, it was extremely inappropriate, because the onus cannot be on Black students to educate their peers and debate issues that are emotionally charged and traumatic to us. The expectation should not be that Black students are required to debate their humanity in an educational context, and there needs to be mandatory curriculum implemented.
Thank you so much.
Can I just jump in? I'm so moved by what Allende and Nyla are saying, and I think particularly as a teacher, I really feel very strongly about what you're saying and about the burden that you're taking on and the incredible fatigue that must be causing you. And I would like to hear just how you take care of yourself and how you encourage your friends and your allies to take care of themselves as well.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry. To take care of yourselves, you know what? Sometimes it is just taking a step back and like, you know what? I will talk from a recent experience. First, what really started my going with, you know, changing like the systematic racism within the education system was when my sophomore year, I was in my AP World History class, and I was the only Black person in that class. And we got to the topic of Africa, and, you know, my teacher was just saying, you know, we basically saying that Africa is known for its diseases and for being poor, and that's literally what he was just telling the entire class. And I'm sitting here like, what in the world? Oh my gosh. Because what he's saying, you know, to all these students, and, you know, you look up to your teacher, you listen to your teacher, because you're like, you know, they know what they're talking about. So it frustrated me so much, because I was like, I just want to stand up and just like, no, you're wrong. And in that moment, I didn't say anything because I was just so frustrated. I was so heated because he was just so adamant about what he was saying. And he also spoke about how like the only rich part of Africa is Egypt, and they're not really Black. And I was just, yeah. So I remember that day, I literally got home. No, I walked out the classroom, and I believe it was lunch, and I just like, I was like, oh my gosh. So I would say definitely like in that exhaustion, it's okay not to speak up in the moment, because you don't know what you're going to say, and you still want to be respectful to your teacher at the same time. So later on, I had written an email to him, and I actually literally linked some sources on some actual facts, and we actually had a further conversation, and it was progressive. It was, I can't, because sometimes teachers need to be taught as well. And so I would say, just to keep yourself at ease, is just remember to breathe. Remember that, like, you do have your allies, you do have your friends. And I did remember talking to some of my friends, and I was just like, do you guys, like, do your teachers say the same things? Like, is this actually what's being taught? And, I think Allende could probably relate to this situation as well, is the N-word being said in our English textbooks, in our books. It happens all the time. And it's just such an awkward, uncomfortable feeling for a Black student when your teacher or your friends are saying this word, and they just say, like, oh, like, it's because, like, it's part of the text, it's history and things like that. But they're not giving us the backstory of the word. They're not giving us the history of the word. We're just saying it. And then, there's conversations afterwards that are just like, oh, if my teacher could say it, I could say it too, and things like that. And it's just like, so mind-boggling. And another thing I did with that situation was I emailed my teacher. I said, you know what? I was very uncomfortable when this word was being said. This is why I believe the word shouldn't be said. And if it is going to be in a book that we're reading, let's talk about why this word is in this book and what this word truly means and why we shouldn't be saying it now. And it's definitely frustrating. I'm even getting frustrated right now just thinking back onto it. And it's just like, breathe. It's just breathe and just know that, like, we're going to be able to change the system. We definitely will. And you just have to remember to breathe and know that you're not going through it alone. Talk to your fellow classmates. And yeah.
Not to digress, but I do want to say I didn't get breathing right until I was 46. So I'm so proud to say that you're getting it right now.
I still struggle with the breathing part.
I remember to breathe.
To get it.
I think the saddest part is, racism is not something that's new. I think racism is a reality that Black people and Black students in the Bay Area, especially in affluent areas like this, have faced our entire lives. I mean, when I found out that someone had called my little brother the N-word and called him a monkey at my high school, I didn't really have time for a lot of self-care because I had to go and work and see what I could do so that in the future, that wasn't someone else's little brother. So I actually don't feel like I have a lot of time for self-care in these situations because there's work that needs to be done.
And I'm so sorry to hear that. And I truly do understand what you're saying, because it's a lot of pressure and weight that's put on us to, like, first of all, we're what, 17 and 18 years old, and we're in these, we're the students, and we are having to fight for these students to get the repercussions and punishments of, like, we have to fight the administration saying, like, is anything going to happen to this student? And a lot of the times it's like, oh, words are just words. He didn't hit him. He didn't touch him. And it's just like, what? And I've been through the same situation, literally the exact same situation. And it's just like, we're fighting in our schools. We're supposed to be safe and feel like, our teachers and our administration are going to stand up for when something wrong is happening. So I'm so sorry. And just remember, breathe. That's the only thing I can.
I'm so sorry too, Allende. And I also just want to say, I was at the Palo Alto protest, and what an incredible accomplishment. I mean, what an amazing gift that you gave to Palo Alto, to the Bay Area, to the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, that was just astounding that you did that. So I hope that you can take some time to really pat yourself on the back and really feel good about all of these incredible ways that you're changing the world. And in order for you to change the world, we need you to rest and sleep and breathe.
Wow. I think one of the challenge, thank you, Nyla and Ayinde, because I think part of the challenge is people don't understand the lived experience right now, and how profound it is from a very young age, living in this time and place and being a skin color. There is nothing like a skin color. I would like to go first to Mita. Yeah.
I hope everybody can hear me. Wonderful discussion, wonderful panel. I would like to ask the panelists a question. If Carter Woodson was to rewrite his book entitled The Miseducation of the Negro, how would it be different? Given the fact that the schools that most African Americans go to are underfunded, and if they get an opportunity to go into neighborhood school districts, they're miseducated. So if Woodrow Wilson was to rewrite that book in this day and age, how different would his pieces be? I think to some extent, I think we're asking the wrong questions. And I sort of agree with Lady A for this one reason. If you were to ask the question, what did the civil rights movement impact? What was the civil rights movement impact on education of African Americans? What was its impact in housing? What was its impact in the criminal justice system? When the data tells us that a third of the warrior age of African American males are either in prison, on probation, or on parole. So if you were to ask those questions, what answers would you arrive at in terms of the impact of the civil rights movement in the quality of life of African Americans today? Another question, what is the per capita expenditure on students in the Ravenfield City School District? How does that compare with the neighboring districts? What percentage of young Black males are in the criminal justice system? When you look at all of those facts, to arrive at a conclusion as to what is the quality of life of African Americans today, and reflect upon what the civil rights movement has had on that life, then I don't know what answers we come to. Thank you.
Can I answer that one? I haven't answered anything all night, so I'll try this one. You know, Mita, one of the interesting things, as being somebody that was born in Jamaica and coming here and seeing what racism was, I spent a lot of my 20s really asking that question. And the reality is when you start looking at works like Warmth of Other Suns, and you start talking about the reality of being Black in America before 1950, and the fact that lynching was standard practice. Like, there is no protest. There's 300 people in a town square and they will lynch you. You know, we have significant issues, but what we can't do is desecrate and denigrate the sacrifices of earlier generations. I remember as a young minister, Pastor Baines, I had the opportunity in 2008 in Mount Vernon, New York, to visit the sick and elderly people in our church. And I remember visiting a lady from Alabama. She was born in, I think, 1905 at the time. And she was talking about the fact she grew up as a sharecropper, and she moved to Mount Vernon, New York in 1965 or 1970, sometime like that. And then she was like, they're going to kill Barack Obama before he can even become president. I remember going to her house in on that November, and she cried like a child because she said, he'll never make it to January. She wasn't crying because she was happy. She was crying because she thought he would never make it to January. I go see her in February, and she's like, I never thought I would see this in my lifetime. We are far from the finish line, but we cannot, and I want to really say it to people tonight, we cannot denigrate and desecrate the sacrifices of people that were sharecroppers, that started universities, and that were uneducated and came here and built houses and sent their kids to universities and private schools. You know, let us be clear, we have problems, but let's not destroy an earlier generation.
In fact, we acknowledge the contributions that the civil rights movement made. It took us halfway up the hill. We've got to go up the next part.
I agree that part.
It's really not denigrating, but we cannot be able to go up the next half without asking certain questions. So that's going to help us redirect the movement in ways that would get us to the mountaintop. And let me talk about this. A lady I know who lives in the Belhaven community, who has the kind of background that you're talking about. She moved out here and she worked for a family in Menlo Park, on the other side of Menlo Park, for 47 years. For 47 years, doing 14, 15, 16-hour days, and was able to raise a family. But here's the critical point. When a mother and a father are outside of the home, what happens to the children? Who raises the children? Little surprise that practically all her male children ended up in prison. All of them. And when she died, there was a big dispute as to who's gonna keep the home that they're living in. I mean, there are issues that we have to deal with. There are questions. There's nothing wrong about asking questions. Yes, the civil rights movement made some significant contributions, but it took us halfway up the hill. And we got to figure out by asking questions, such as the ones that I asked, how do we get to the rest of the hill? How do we get to the top of the mountain?
I want to go to Henrietta Burrows now for the next question. Hi, Henrietta, how are you doing?
I am fine, thank you so much. I'm directing my question to the two police chiefs and to the three mayors on the panel. President Trump sent federal agents into Portland, and he has threatened to send the federal agents into other cities that are having protests. And I'm wondering, under what circumstances would you welcome federal agents in terms of protests in the two cities, the three cities that are represented on the panel?
I can start. So the DNA of East Palo Alto, as you know, is that we are a city of protest for everything that we do not like, from housing to buildings, to companies, to policies that are passed that there's not agreement on from residents. We can expect a protest. And I love that about East Palo Alto. I call us a spirited city. We also know how to do peaceful protests probably better than most cities that I know. And what was surprising for me, and I will raise this as an interesting aside, is that when the protest started, I observed something interesting about our target in East Palo Alto. The protests were happening in Oakland, and they were happening in San Jose, the big ones. East Palo Alto hadn't even had its first protest yet. And I noticed that our target was boarded up. And I could not understand for the life of me why, There were over 200 targets in the state of California, and 20 plus were boarded. And we happened to be one of them because we had not even had a protest at that moment. So you can imagine my upsetness. Of course, cordial, thoughtful, understanding, and seeking to be understood. But I needed to have a conversation with Target about how they had decided that East Palo Alto was the place to board up. And 2 days later, the boarding came down. And we had a number of protests in East Palo Alto, and we had no reason for any business at all to be boarded. So to the point about protests, I would say under no circumstance would I welcome intervention from any government agency that is seeking to mute what is a natural part of the DNA of East Palo Alto. One of the things I love about our protests is they're typically assisted and supported by law enforcement and by city staff and by council members and by the community. We typically do them together because we are sharing a lived experience and or empathizing together on a shared experience, and it is right, and it is normal, and it is good, and it should not be suppressed. So that's my firm stand on the city of East Palo Alto, and then I'll be quiet and open the door to the other mayors to say the same.
The same? The same?
Say the same.
Thank you so much for your answer, and I'd love to hear Mayor Taylor.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Ms. Burrows. And I agree with Mayor Wallace-Jones. There are no circumstances that I would welcome any agency coming into the city of Menlo Park and operating at will, especially what I've seen online. I watched someone get kidnapped in a car and were protected by law enforcement. And to see something like that and to think that it would ever even come to the Bay Area is scary. And I would not welcome any federal agency coming into the city of Menlo Park and operating at will.
100% agreed with my fellow mayors, and thank you for the question. And I'll just note, if many of you I know were at the march organized by Allende with 5,000 or 6,000 people by estimates, there was not a single incident. It was completely peaceful. It was about justice and equity, and people were mad and they were angry and they were speaking up. But it was one of the best things I've seen in Palo Alto in many years. So.
Could I ask Chief Pardini and Chief Johnson to weigh in on this as well? I'm just really curious about how this is even possible for these federal agents to be brought in to Portland and Seattle. And could you sort of help us to explain what's going on?
I can start off and give Bob an opportunity to chime in. You know, the federal government oversees our country, and so they have some autonomy to arbitrarily come in and do things like this. And for a local law enforcement leader, help is welcome if I ask for it. It's not welcome if you come crashing through the door and walk across my brand new carpets with mud all over your shoes, creating a trail of destruction with the relationships that we have with the community. And we know our community. If we need help, we ask for it. But just have, you know, the federal government come in and start dictating what they're going to do and how they're going to address any issues in the city, it goes against everything that I'd say a local police chief wants to have happen. You know, like the mayor talked about earlier, we are a city of protest, and I have a very good relationship with a lot of our protest organizers. So, you know, almost exclusively they'll get through the protest without any damage or destruction. And sometimes they've leaned on me and asked for advice about how to protest and not get themselves, you know, in a position where they get themselves arrested. And so I've helped counsel some of them on how to do a proper protest, as well as, you know, you're hoping the media is going to come out and cover this. So you want to conduct yourselves appropriately and look very professional and put a good message out, so that when somebody's watching that 30 seconds on the news, they look at that and they're like, hey, I can, you know, I think these guys have got a good point, versus the guys running down the street with spray paint cans and spray painting buildings. And, you know, somebody looks at that and they're probably not going to give it another thought about whether these people are, you know, going down the right path. With that, I'll give the mic to Bob so he can touch on this.
Yeah, thanks, Al. The, you know, one of the things to answer the question, you know, I think in Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and even East Palo Alto, I think all three of the agencies do a very good job. And I personally am very proud of the men and women of the Palo Alto Police Department over the last 8 weeks and how they've helped assist and collaborate with demonstrations. As we talked about much tonight, the June 6th demonstration for Palo Alto is definitely probably our largest and most well attended. I think estimates range from 4,000 to 7,000 or maybe even bigger. And yet it was extremely peaceful, even though everybody had an opportunity to voice their opinions and had a march afterwards. And it was that collaboration that I believe helped us get there. And those demonstrations have continued, maybe not to that size and scope, but Palo Alto, we've had demonstrations consistently each and every week since then, of various sizes, and all of them have remained peaceful. And I think it's a couple of different reasons, which we don't need to get into all of them, but I think it is because we allow that space. And Palo Alto and these other cities, Menlo Park and East Palo Alto, have always taken that approach of, you know, that we're here to support you and assist you, not necessarily to stop and prevent you. To answer your question on the authority of the federal government, I would also just remind, I think, all of us that, you know, much of the time, and I'm not going to speak to the incidents throughout the country and where federal agents have been brought in. There's a lot of issues going on in a lot of different places, obviously. But a lot of the resources, I think, originally were brought in to protect federal assets, whether it's a federal courthouse or whatever it may be. We in this region don't have a lot of that, but we do have federal assets. You know, the Veterans Administration is one of those, for example. Even though Menlo Park has a very large veterans hospital, as well as Palo Alto. And a lot of people think Menlo Park Police Department provides jurisdiction for that, and maybe even Palo Alto for Palo Altos, but that's not necessarily true. It's not true at all. Those each have their own federal law enforcement agency that provides jurisdiction over the property. So I could see, to be honest with you, if a major incident were to happen, federal resources could be brought in to protect those properties. But to answer the question on whether, and much to what Al said, would I, as the chief of the city of Palo Alto, request or even really have any desire to have federal agents come into the city that we provide jurisdiction over? No, it's not something I can foresee asking for. I think we have a great mutual aid system if we did need it. And fortunately, I'll continue to knock on wood. I hope that we never do. Because again, I think it's the neighborhood, the region, it's different than some of the other parts of the country that are experiencing the civil unrest that's justified, in some people's opinion, of bringing in those resources.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you so
And
much, Chief. Is that Chief Pardini? Do you have to say anything?
Oh, I was just gonna, one closing comment that about that relationship that we have with our communities and protests. One of the things we talk to them about, and you know, I can tell you, I do it personally sometimes. I ask the protest organizers, I go, watch for any outsiders or anybody you don't recognize, because those are the ones that come in and do the damage and destruction. And so it's worked out really well where they're like, yeah, don't worry, we're on it. We see anybody we don't recognize, we're going to go over and find out why they're here. And if they're here for you know, the right reason, good, but they're going to conduct themselves the way we expect them to conduct themselves. And that gives them ownership of the protest and the protesters. I go, you know, if they're not going to damage something, they're going to try and start a fight with the cops. So if you guys can straighten them out before it gets to that, it's going to be a much better environment for everybody. So they've done a really good job about watching out for outside influences that want to come in and create unrest. And I'll close it up with that.
Okay. Our next question comes from the Vice Chair of the Human Relations Commission, Valerie Stinger, who I know is going to have a good question.
I
Hi,
wish
Valerie.
I did have a good question. Hi, Pastor Smith. I actually do not have a question. I just have a comment.
Okay.
I've heard a lot of really good questions, and this is trivial in comparison, but a lot of the comments have been, we need to make changes for the Black community. And I feel really strongly that it has
Did I lose you?
and by the diversity of the community and the diversity of experience, the diversity of opinion, and it's to our benefit as well as an obligation. We have a lot of environmentalists in our community who would argue that Monsanto should be protested because they have homogeneous crops and grasses, and that kills the diversity of the natural. Well, I would say I want the humanity, the diversity of humanity, the diversity of experience in my community. And I understand the obligation, but I also know that I'm going to benefit from the outcome. And I think it's important to look for that experience.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I do agree with you 100%. We do need diversity in our community, and diversity comes from constant action, not just inaction and talking about it, constant steps forward. Right now we have Bernard. He will be our last public comment. Mr. Bernard, are you there? Welcome back, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
All right, thank you very much for giving me a follow-up opportunity. In terms of wrapping up tonight, one of the things I want to say clearly is, my earlier comment was really, I'm trying to get everybody to focus on this. We need to attack the friction that's been put in the system to slow down the progress toward our objectives. One of the targets for me is allowing local action when it contravenes national policy or the majority policy. Jim Crow was allowed to undo the national law because we were allowed to work at a local level. So what I'm trying to get across is not so much that we can't be patient, but we can't be patient about confronting the specific things that slow down the progress. So, for example, and I'll bring one home to our area because it's really important that we do our local part on this. If the police chief can't discipline members of his police force for their activity, then we need to attack the association or whatever group is prohibiting that. So if the problem or the source of some of the problem is him having to deal with unions, police unions, then we need to help him by attacking the unions. If the problem is we can't get housing because real estate agents keep steering people to a specific area, then we need to attack the companies that are allowing that to happen. And I'm using the word attack on purpose. Originally what I said was confronting them, because the issue is that social injustice is wrong. And if you truly believe it's wrong, then it's wrong. It's not something you pause. And I heard the students say earlier, and I want to ask all of us, not just the students, to take on some of that burden. It's not the students' burden, just like it's not Black people's burden to educate every white person. It's not the students' burden to do all this. So all of us need to be attacking these situations from wherever we are. And that's my point. And we don't need to put it off and wait for the other side to feel comfortable discussing it.
The weight is killing us. To be more than metaphorical, but very literal. The weight is killing us. Thank you.
Mr. Bernard, that was such wonderful, well put, and sage advice for us to close out tonight with. The greatest thing is silence. We have to speak out against the injustices we see. The bravery shown by Nyla and Ayende in speaking out, you said it the best. It's not just for a certain generation, but all generations. And it's the job of each of us to look at things and speak out. As we close out tonight, I want to hand it over to my amazing, phenomenal co-moderator, Professor Allyson Hobbs of that fine school, Stanford University. And she's going to close us out. Mayor Wallace-Jones thinks that's a good institution also for some reason. She's a big fan of that place for some reason.
Well, and I just want to say that I am so deeply inspired by the students, and we really do have a responsibility to the students, because at Stanford, we're really pushing very hard to create a department in African and African American studies. And that is something that we should have already had. That's something that activists in 1968 were fighting for. And I think that the students are reminding us of just how important it is for us to do the work where we are, as Mr. Bernard said, and the importance of each person playing a role so that all of this hard work does not fall on the shoulders of young people. We all have a role to play. So I really salute everyone on this panel. Thank you all so much for being here and for contributing so much to this conversation. And thank you so much to the Midpen Media Center, to Jesse Norfleet, to Stan Ng, and thank you so much to all of our incredible audience members and participants for your excellent questions. We're going to end with silence, with an 8-minute and 46-second period of silence to honor the life of George Floyd. And as we do this, there's going to be a painting on the screen that a close friend of mine, Constance Brantley, created. She's an artist who lives in Los Angeles. And I found this painting so powerful, and I asked her to tell me a little bit about what inspired her to paint it. And I just want to read what she said as some context for it. So she said, "I don't like to explain my work too much because it's really about what each person feels when they see it. But I will say that there have been these strong, raw, conflicting emotions about our country that have been building up inside me, and I believe inside of many of us for a long, long time now. Pain, patriotism, outrage, helplessness, empowerment, hope, anger, love, lies, truth. And all these feelings reached a boiling point with the murder of George Floyd, along with Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others. George Floyd did not deserve that fate. None of them did. But here we are in America. That's our reality, and we cannot hide from it." I'll also say I took the painting's title from the Pledge of Allegiance. We all grew up reciting that pledge. We said it so many times, we've still got it memorized. And yet, how often did we ever really think about its words, its meaning? We pledge allegiance to the flag, the emblem of America, which supposedly is to provide liberty and justice for all. That liberty, that justice is supposed to be for all of us, one nation, indivisible, under God. I can almost guarantee you that every day as a kid in school, George Floyd made that pledge to the flag. and what did he get in return? So I'm so appreciative of Constance's beautiful art and her beautiful words, and I love the honesty and the depth of feeling that she conveys. And I'm glad that we're ending tonight in memory of George Floyd and honoring his life.